My parents said, "We're giving the family business to your brother." You understand. I said, "Completely." Then I started my own company. 2 years later, they asked me to bail out his failing operation. I sent them a brochure for business loans. Hey Reddit. So my parents handed over our family's HVAC business to my golden child brother despite me running it for 8 years. 2 years later, they're begging me to save him from bankruptcy. Here's how I watched it all burn while building my own empire. I'm 34, male, the oldest of two sons. My brother Colin, 29 male, has been the favorite since the day he was born. Not even subtle about it. Different rules, different expectations, different everything. Growing up, I had a 10 p.m. curfew until I moved out at 23. Colin? No curfew at all by the time he was 16. I had to maintain a B average to keep my car privileges. Colin failed 2 classes senior year and still got a brand new truck for graduation. I worked summers at Dad's HVAC company starting at 14, learning the trade from the ground up. Colin spent his summers at the lake house with friends. The favoritism was so blatant that even extended family noticed. My uncle pulled me aside at a barbecue once when I was 17 and said straight up that my parents were setting Colin up to fail by never holding him accountable for anything. Turns out Uncle Ray was right, but it took a lot longer than anyone expected. My parents own Morrison Heating and Cooling, a mid-sized HVAC company serving the greater Phoenix metro area. Dad started it 30 years ago, built it from a one-truck operation into a fleet of 12 vehicles with 23 employees. Annual revenue around $3.2 million when things were running smooth. By the time I was 22, I'd worked every position in that company. Started as a helper hauling equipment and cleaning job sites. Moved up to apprentice installer, then lead installer, then got my contractor's license and started running service calls independently. Eventually became the de facto operations manager, even though Dad never officially gave me the title or the pay bump that should have come with it. Colin went to college on my parents' dime. State school, business degree, that he barely scraped through with a 2.6 GPA. During those 4 years, he came home maybe 3 times and never once stopped by the shop to learn the business. Didn't matter. He was getting educated while I was just doing HVAC work. The double standard burned, but I loved the work. There's something satisfying about diagnosing a complex system problem, fixing it right, and knowing a family won't be sweating through another Phoenix summer. Plus, I was good at it. Really good. Customers would request me specifically for service calls. I built relationships with general contractors who trusted my estimates and knew I'd deliver quality work on schedule. When Colin graduated, Dad threw this big party at the country club, rented out the whole banquet room, invited everyone from the Chamber of Commerce, the whole deal. Made this speech about how proud he was that his son was now educated in business principles and ready to take the company into the modern era. I was standing in the back in my work clothes because I'd come straight from a job site. Nobody had told me it was supposed to be formal. Colin was up front in a new suit, soaking up the attention, and hadn't spent a single day learning how a heat exchanger worked or what refrigerant we used in residential units. That should have been my first clue about where this was headed. Colin joined the company the following Monday with the title Business Development Manager and a salary that was $20,000 more than what I was making after 8 years. His job description was intentionally vague, something about identifying growth opportunities and building strategic partnerships. In practice, what that meant was Colin showed up around 10 a.m., left by 3 p.m., and spent most of his time taking potential clients to lunch on the company card. These potential clients were usually his college buddies or random business owners who had no need for commercial HVAC services, but enjoyed a free meal. Meanwhile, I was handling the actual operations, scheduling technicians, managing inventory, dealing with supplier negotiations, handling the difficult customers, training new installers, and still running service calls when we were short-staffed. I'd arrive at 6 a.m. to prep trucks for the day, and often stayed past 7 p.m., dealing with whatever crisis had emerged. Dad started pulling me aside with this concerned look, saying things like, "You know Colin's still learning the business," and "Give him time to find his footing." Time to find his footing doing what? The guy didn't know the difference between a compressor and a condenser coil. About 6 months into Colin's tenure, we lost our biggest commercial client, a property management company that oversaw 47 apartment complexes in the metro area. They'd been with us for 12 years. The account rep called me directly to explain they were switching to a competitor. "Nothing personal," he said. "Your work quality is still excellent, but your brother quoted us a maintenance contract that was 40% higher than market rate, then told us we were lucky to work with a premium service provider." We're not paying premium prices for attitude. I found out later Colin had gone to the meeting unprepared, hadn't reviewed their previous contract terms, and basically tried to wing it based on business principles he half remembered from a pricing strategy class. That account was worth roughly $280,000 annually. When I brought this up to Dad, he said Colin was still learning the sales process and that sometimes you have to lose a few to understand the game. We'd just lost $250,000 in reliable revenue because his golden boy didn't bother doing basic preparation. That became the pattern. Colin would create problems through incompetence or laziness. I'd either fix them or absorb the consequences, and Dad would make excuses about learning curves and adjustment periods. The worst part wasn't even the favoritism anymore. It was watching Dad systematically ignore reality. Colin was objectively bad at every aspect of the business, but Dad had built up this narrative in his head about his youngest son being naturally gifted at business leadership. Evidence didn't matter. Results didn't matter. Only the story mattered. Mom was no better. She'd coo about how handsome Colin looked in his business casual clothes, how professional he sounded on phone calls, how proud she was that he was following in his father's footsteps. Never mind that Dad had built the company through brutal 16-hour days and hands-on technical expertise. Colin's version of following in those footsteps involved catered lunches and leaving early for golf. My wife Brooke saw the writing on the wall before I did. She works as a project manager for a construction firm, so she understands how businesses actually operate versus how people pretend they operate. They're going to give him the company, she told me one night after a family dinner where Dad had spent an hour praising Colin's innovative thinking about some marketing idea he'd stolen from a podcast. And when they do, you need to already have your exit plan ready. I didn't want to believe her. Despite everything, I'd built that company alongside my dad. I knew every customer, every supplier, every employee. The business was as much mine as it was his, even if my name wasn't on the ownership papers. But Brooke pushed me to start preparing just in case. We started saving more aggressively. I began documenting my contributions to the company, projects I'd managed, clients I'd brought in, systems I'd improved, got copies of customer testimonials that specifically mentioned me by name, started quietly building relationships with key suppliers and contractors independent of the company. The conversation happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I just finished a particularly difficult installation at a commercial building downtown, retrofitting an outdated system in 110-degree heat. I was filthy, exhausted, and looking forward to a cold drink and a shower. Dad called me into his office. Mom was there too, which was unusual. Colin was conspicuously absent. "We need to talk about succession planning," Dad started. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. He went into this long speech about building legacy and family continuity, about how he'd always dreamed of passing the business down to his sons, about how important it was to have fresh vision and new energy leading the company into the future. Then he got to it. "Your mother and I have decided that Colin will take over as president and majority owner of Morrison Heating and Cooling." The room went quiet. I just looked at him, waiting for the rest. "You understand why, don't you?" Mom added. "Colin has the education and the business background. He's better positioned to lead." Lead what? A company he didn't understand? Employees he'd never worked alongside? Clients he couldn't identify if they walked in the door? "What about me?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Dad shifted in his chair. "Well, of course you'll stay on. You're valuable to operations. Colin will need your technical expertise as he transitions into leadership. So I'd continue doing the actual work while Colin took credit and collected the owner's profits." "Perfect." "He'll need my expertise," I repeated slowly. "Exactly." Dad looked relieved that I was understanding. "You two will make a great team. Colin handles the business side, you handle the technical side." Except Colin didn't handle anything on the business side except taking credit and spending money. But pointing that out would just start an argument I'd already lost before walking into the room. "When does this happen?" I asked. "We're planning the transition for 6 months from now. Gives Colin time to get more familiar with operations." Dad was using his reasonable voice, the one that implied any disagreement would be unreasonable. 6 months. They were giving me 6 months' notice that I'd be working for my less qualified, less experienced, less capable younger brother. "Okay," I said. They both looked surprised. I think they'd been expecting me to argue or get emotional. "Okay," Mom repeated. "Okay, I understand." And I did understand. I understood that they'd made their choice, and nothing I said would change it. I understood that all the years of work, all the relationships I'd built, all the knowledge I'd accumulated didn't matter as much as birth order and their fantasy version of Colin's potential. I also understood that I wasn't going to stick around to watch it implode. That night, I told Brooke what happened. She wasn't surprised, just angry on my behalf. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Start my own company." "When?" "Tomorrow." She smiled. Not a happy smile, more like a warrior getting ready for battle. "Let's do it." We spent that evening mapping out the plan. I had enough savings to cover startup costs and about 3 months of living expenses. Brooke's income would cover our mortgage and basics. I knew the residential HVAC market inside and out. I had relationships with suppliers who'd give me credit terms based on my reputation. I had a contractor's license in my own name. The main risk was non-compete clauses. But I'd checked my employment contract years ago during a slow week. Dad had hired some bargain attorney to draft it, and the non-compete was absurdly broad and almost certainly unenforceable. It claimed I couldn't work in any business related to climate control within the state of Arizona for 5 years. That would prevent me from getting any job in my field and wouldn't hold up in court. Plus, Dad would have to actually sue me to enforce it, which would require admitting in public court filings that his oldest son had left to start a competing business. The embarrassment alone would probably keep him from taking legal action. By midnight, we had a basic framework. I'd start a residential-focused HVAC company targeting the higher-end market that Morrison Heating and Cooling had always underserved. I'd offer premium service with premium pricing, the kind of work where quality mattered more than being the cheapest bid. The next morning, I started making calls. First to my Uncle Ray, who'd always been straight with me. He owned a successful electrical contracting business and knew everyone in the construction trades. When I explained the situation, he didn't even seem surprised. "About time," he said. "I've been wondering how long you'd let them treat you like hired help. What do you need?" "Advice, connections, maybe some referrals when I get up and running." "You got it. I'll spread the word you're starting your own shop. Most of the contractors I know already prefer working with you anyway. They just call Morrison because that's where you work." Next call was to Linda, our primary supply vendor. She ran a commercial HVAC supply house and had always been straight about industry relationships. "I'm thinking about starting my own company," I told her. "Need to know if I can get supplier credit based on my personal reputation, rather than Morrison's account." "Honey, I've been waiting for this call for years. Your dad's account is only as good as it is because of you. Colin's been calling here trying to negotiate pricing on units he can't even properly identify. You want credit terms? I'll match whatever I'm giving Morrison, and your account rep will actually know what she's talking about." The calls continued. Contractors I'd built relationships with over the years. Building managers who'd requested me personally for service calls. Former Morrison employees who'd left because they couldn't stand working with Colin. Every conversation was the same. People weren't just willing to work with me, they were excited about it. Turned out my reputation was a lot stronger than I'd realized. Within a week, I had commitments for startup work worth about $75,000. Not huge money, but enough to prove the concept and pay initial expenses. I kept working at Morrison Heating and Cooling like nothing had changed. Showed up early, stayed late, handled the difficult jobs, trained the newer installers. I just stopped volunteering for extra projects or going above and beyond to fix Colin's mistakes. Dad noticed, but attributed it to me being moody about the succession plan. He pulled me aside to give me a speech about being professional and supporting Colin during the transition period. "This is hard for him too," Dad said. "He knows he has big shoes to fill." Big shoes to fill. Colin couldn't fill a pair of children's shoes at this point, but sure. "I'm being completely professional," I told him, which was true. I was doing exactly my job description, nothing more and nothing less. The problem was that for years, I'd been doing my job plus half of Colin's job, plus covering for Dad's declining involvement. Now I was just doing my job, and the cracks were starting to show. 3 months after the succession announcement, I filed incorporation papers for Coleman Climate Control. The name was intentional, professional enough for the high-end market I was targeting, but also my name. This wasn't some cute startup trying to sound bigger than it was. This was me, my skills, my reputation. Brooke helped design the logo and website. We positioned the company as premium residential service, the kind of work where a homeowner cares more about quality than saving a few $100. Our tagline was, "Expert service every time." Simple, direct, and a subtle dig at Morrison's inconsistent quality since Colin got involved. I started taking on small residential jobs on weekends. Nothing that violated my employment contract, just side work that gave me a chance to test my systems and build a client base. Every job got done perfectly. Every customer got my personal cell number. Every installation came with a detailed explanation of the system and maintenance recommendations. Word spread fast in the upper middle class neighborhoods I was targeting. Homeowners talked to each other. A good experience with a contractor gets mentioned at backyard barbecues and HOA meetings. Within 2 months of weekend work, I had a waiting list. The fourth month after the announcement, I gave notice at Morrison Heating and Cooling. Dad was in a meeting when I submitted my resignation letter to the office manager, so I didn't have to have the conversation immediately. The letter was professional and brief. Please accept this as my formal 2 weeks notice. I've accepted an opportunity that better aligns with my career goals. I'm grateful for the experience and knowledge gained during my time here. Colin called me within an hour, panicked. What is this about resigning? Dad's going to lose it. I found another opportunity. What opportunity? Where are you going? Does it matter? Of course it matters. You can't just leave. We need you here. We. As if Colin had any actual stake in keeping operations running smoothly beyond his paycheck clearing. You'll figure it out, I said. You've got that business degree. This isn't funny. You know I'm still learning the technical side. That was the thing. He'd been still learning for almost 2 years and hadn't bothered to actually learn anything. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Dad called next, using his disappointed voice. We need to talk about this resignation. You're being emotional and making rash decisions. Nothing emotional about it. I have another opportunity. What opportunity? With who? I could have lied. Could have made up a job with a competitor in another state. But I was done pretending. I started my own company, Coleman Climate Control, residential service, premium market. The silence on the other end was so complete, I thought the call had dropped. You started a competing business? His voice was ice. I started my own business. It'll compete to the extent that both companies serve customers in the same geographic area. That violates your non-compete. Actually, it doesn't. Your non-compete is unenforceable. Any employment lawyer would tell you that. But you're welcome to try taking legal action if you want to explain to a judge why your oldest son left to start his own company rather than work for his younger brother. Another long silence. I thought you were better than this, he finally said. I thought you were better than this too, Dad. Guess we were both wrong. I hung up before he could respond. The next 2 weeks were tense. I finished out my time at Morrison Heating and Cooling because I'm not the kind of person who leaves coworkers in the lurch. Trained the senior installer on some of the systems I'd designed. Documented my customer relationships as much as I could without technically violating company policy. Made sure the transition would be as smooth as possible for the employees who'd done nothing wrong. Colin tried being buddy-buddy, suggesting we talk about this and work something out. When that didn't work, he tried guilt, then anger, then back to buddy-buddy. The guy had no consistency because he had no actual position beyond wanting things to stay comfortable for him. Dad oscillated between cold silence and passive-aggressive comments about loyalty and family responsibility. Mom sent a long text about how disappointed she was in my choices and how I was breaking your father's heart. The extended family had opinions too. Uncle Ray sent a bottle of expensive stuff with a note that just said, "Congratulations." My aunt called to say I'd always been the smart one, and she was glad I was finally standing up for myself. Mom's sister left a voicemail about respecting my parents' wishes and not being selfish. My last day, I cleaned out my desk, turned in my keys and company truck, and walked out without ceremony. I'd spent 12 years of my life in that building, learned everything I knew about the trade there, built relationships and systems that made it successful. Walking away should have been harder than it was, but mostly, I felt relief. Coleman Climate Control officially launched the following Monday. I'd already lined up enough work to stay busy for 6 weeks. Brooke handled the business operations from home. Scheduling, invoicing, customer service. I did the technical work with help from 2 subcontractors I'd worked with before who were happy to partner on projects. The first few months were intense. I was working 60-hour weeks, doing everything from high-end installations to emergency service calls. But every job was mine. Every satisfied customer was someone I'd earned through quality work, not family name. Every dollar of profit went to building something that belonged to me. Word continued spreading. The referral rate was insane. About 70% of new clients came from recommendations by previous customers. The neighborhoods I was targeting appreciated quality work and were willing to pay for it. I wasn't trying to be the cheapest option. I was trying to be the best option. 6 months after launching, I hired my first employee, a young guy fresh out of trade school who reminded me of myself at that age. Eager to learn, willing to work hard, grateful for someone who'd actually train him properly. His name was Austin, and he soaked up knowledge like a sponge. "Why did you hire me?" he asked during his first week. "I've only got classroom experience." "Because you showed up on time for the interview, asked intelligent questions, and didn't act like the job was beneath you. Plus, you actually read the equipment manual I sent you. That was a test? Everything's a test. You passed. By month 9, Coleman Climate Control had steady revenue around $40,000 monthly. Not huge compared to Morrison's $250,000 monthly average, but impressive for a startup. More importantly, my overhead was way lower. No bloated administrative staff, no country club memberships or catered lunches, no executives who didn't understand the work collecting paychecks. I started hearing things through the industry grapevine. Morrison Heating and Cooling was struggling. Service calls were taking longer because their experienced installers had to compensate for poor scheduling. Estimates were getting rejected because Colin was either wildly overpricing or underpricing depending on his mood. Employee turnover was climbing because the work environment had become chaotic. But that was their problem now, not mine. Year 2, things accelerated. I hired 3 more installers and a dedicated service technician, leased a small office and workshop space, bought 2 trucks with Coleman Climate Control wrapped in our logo. Brooke transitioned from handling operations from home to running a real office with actual systems and processes. We were becoming a real company, not just me and some subcontractors. The high-end residential market was responding exactly like I'd hoped. Homeowners in the $500,000 plus price range didn't want the cheapest option. They wanted someone who'd show up on time, explain the system clearly, do quality work, and be available if problems emerged. That was our entire business model, and it was working. By the end of year 2, Coleman Climate Control was pulling in $75,000 monthly revenue with healthy profit margins. We'd built a reputation for premium service that commanded premium pricing. Our online reviews were almost universally 5 stars. General contractors were calling us for high-end new construction projects. I wasn't just surviving without Morrison Heating and Cooling. I was thriving. That's when Dad called. I was on a job site installing a new system in a custom home when my phone rang. Hadn't spoken to either parent in close to 18 months. The number came up as Dad's cell, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. "This is Coleman," I answered, using my professional voice. "It's your father." His voice was different. Smaller somehow. "What can I do for you?" "We need to talk. Can you come by the house this evening?" "I'm pretty busy. What's this about?" Silence. Then, "It's about the business. Morrison's business. We're having some difficulties and thought you might be willing to discuss solutions." Solutions. Interesting word choice. What kind of difficulties? "I'd rather discuss it in person. Please. This is important." The please was what got me. My dad didn't say please often. When he did, it meant things were serious. "I can stop by around 7, I told him. I spent the rest of the day wondering what the meeting was about. The grapevine had told me Morrison was struggling, but I hadn't heard specifics. Part of me was curious. Another part was preparing to be angry if this was some attempt to guilt me into coming back. Brooke's advice was simple. Go, listen, don't commit to anything, and remember they made their choice. I showed up at 7:03 p.m. The house looked the same. Nice suburban property in a good neighborhood. The kind of place that screamed successful small business owner. Dad's truck in the driveway. Lights on inside. Mom answered the door. She looked older than I remembered. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Dad was in the living room. Colin was there too, which I hadn't expected. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the 2 since I'd seen him. Dark circles under his eyes, sitting hunched on the couch like a kid waiting for a lecture. "Thanks for coming," Dad started. "Sit down, please." I stayed standing. "What's going on?" Dad exchanged a look with Mom. "Morrison Heating and Cooling is in trouble. Serious trouble. We've been losing clients, cash flow is tight, and we're looking at potentially closing down if we can't turn things around." "How bad is it?" "Revenue's down about 60% from 2 years ago. We've had to lay off 12 people. Lost our line of credit with the bank. Suppliers are demanding cash on delivery because we've been late on invoicing." I looked at Colin. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "What happened?" Dad started explaining. Clients leaving, employees quitting, equipment breaking down. All the symptoms. None of the cause. Finally, I interrupted. "What happened?" I repeated, looking directly at Colin this time. He looked up, defensive. "It's not my fault. The market changed. Competition increased. Labor costs went up. The market didn't change that much in 2 years. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I've been trying to run the company the way Dad built it." "Dad built it by knowing the technical work and treating customers right. What did you actually do?" Mom cut in. "This isn't helpful. We're not here to assign blame." "Then why am I here?" Dad took a breath. "We need help. Financial help. We need about $180,000 to get current on bills, cover payroll for 3 months, and buy enough inventory to take on new jobs. We're asking if you'd be willing to invest in the company as a partner. The audacity was almost impressive. They wanted me to bail out the company they'd given to Colin specifically to exclude me from ownership. Let me make sure I understand. You want me to invest $180,000 in a failing company that you deliberately gave to Colin instead of me? It's not failing, Colin protested. We're just going through a rough patch. A rough patch that's cost you 60% of revenue and 12 employees? The industry is competitive. I'm in the same industry. I'm not losing clients. That shut him up. Dad tried again. This is still a family business. We thought you might want to help preserve what your grandfather started. Grandfather. The guy who'd built a small local company that Dad had expanded, that I'd modernized and systematized, and that Colin had apparently run into the ground through sheer incompetence. What would this partnership look like? I asked. Dad looked hopeful. We'd give you 25% ownership in exchange for the investment and helping get operations back on track. I did the math in my head. They were valuing a failing company at $720,000, which was delusional. Morrison probably had about $200,000 in actual assets and negative working capital based on what Dad just described. Let me think about it, I said. How long do you need? Dad pressed. I'll let you know. The drive home was quiet. I wasn't angry, exactly. More like amazed that they thought this would work. That they could treat me like a disposable employee for years. Give the company to Colin, watch him destroy it, and then expect me to just write a check to fix everything. Brooke was waiting up when I got home. I explained the whole situation. What are you going to do? She asked. Say no, obviously. How are you going to say no? That was the real question. I could just send a text declining. Could call Dad and explain I wasn't interested. Could ghost them completely and let them figure it out. Instead, I did something better. The next morning, I called Dad back. About that partnership discussion, I started. Yes? He sounded eager. I'm going to pass. But I did put together some information that might help. What kind of information? Business resources. Contact info for commercial lenders. Restructuring consultants, that kind of thing. I'm sending it over now. I'd spent an hour that morning compiling a list of resources for struggling small businesses. Bank contacts who specialized in distressed company loans. Business consultants who did operational assessments. Even some bankruptcy attorneys who did free initial consultations. The email was professional and helpful. Exactly the kind of thing someone would send if they genuinely wanted to help but couldn't invest personally. The subject line was, Resources for Morrison Heating and Cooling. I also included some general advice. Key things struggling HVAC companies need to focus on. Technical quality, customer service, and operational efficiency. The owner needs to understand the technical work well enough to ensure quality. Customer relationships matter more than price. Efficient operations keep costs manageable. Consider bringing in experienced operations management if current leadership lacks technical expertise. That last line was the kill shot. Professional enough that I could claim I was trying to help. Specific enough that anyone reading it would understand. I was basically saying Colin didn't know what he was doing. Dad called back that afternoon. Got your email. This isn't what we were hoping for. I understand. But I'm not in a position to invest right now. Coleman Climate Control is still growing and needs our capital. You're really going to let us fail? I'm not letting you do anything, Dad. You made decisions about Morrison's future. Now you're dealing with the consequences of those decisions? That's how business works. This is your family legacy. No, it's your business. You made that clear when you gave it to Colin instead of me. I'm building my own legacy now. He tried arguing, brought up family responsibility, loyalty, how I was being selfish. I let him wind down before responding. Dad, you chose Colin to lead Morrison Heating and Cooling because you thought he'd be better at it than me. This is him being better at it. If you think you made a mistake, that's between you and him. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. The next few months, I heard updates through Uncle Ray and industry contacts. Morrison Heating and Cooling tried getting a business loan, but couldn't qualify. The bank wouldn't extend credit to a company with declining revenue and operational problems. Dad tried to sell the business, but couldn't find buyers willing to pay anything close to what he thought it was worth. Finally, they filed for bankruptcy protection, liquidated the equipment, settled with creditors for pennies on the dollar, and closed the doors after 30 years. Colin, as far as I heard, moved out of state to work in his wife's family's restaurant business. Something in hospitality, where his lack of technical skills would be less of a problem. Dad took it hard. He'd spent 3 decades building that company, and watching it collapse hurt regardless of whose fault it actually was. Mom was angry. At me. At the situation. At the universe. She sent a few nasty messages about how I'd chosen money over family. I didn't respond to the messages. There was nothing to say. They'd made their choice. I'd made mine. And the natural consequences had played out exactly as anyone paying attention could have predicted. Uncle Ray summed it up best over coffee a few months after Morrison closed. Your dad spent so many years believing Colin was special that he couldn't see he was actually just average. And in business, average isn't good enough when you've got someone exceptional right there, waiting for a chance. Coleman Climate Control continued growing. Year 3, we expanded into light commercial work, small retail spaces, office buildings, that kind of thing. Hired an administrative assistant to help Brooke with the office operations. Added 2 more service technicians and another installer. Austin, my first employee, was now training new hires. The kid had turned into a solid technician with good customer service skills. He'd been with me from almost the beginning and understood the culture we were building. Revenue hit $95,000 monthly with consistent growth projections. We were nowhere near Morrison's peak numbers, but we were profitable, stable, and building something sustainable. More importantly, the company culture was healthy. People showed up wanting to do good work. Customers trusted us. Suppliers respected us. About 6 months after Morrison closed, I got a surprising call from one of their former major clients, a property management company with 43 apartment complexes. They'd gone with another contractor after Morrison folded, but weren't happy with the service. "We kept hoping you'd expand into commercial work," the account manager said. "Your reputation is excellent. Would Coleman Climate Control be interested in bidding on our maintenance contract?" We got the contract. Turned out being consistently reliable and technically competent was more valuable than being the cheapest bid. Who knew? That contract was worth $320,000 annually, more than Morrison's old contract with the same company. We hired 3 more people just to handle that account properly. By year 4, Coleman Climate Control was a legitimate competitor in the Phoenix Metro HVAC market. We had 19 employees, 8 trucks, a real office with a workshop, and revenue around $135,000 monthly. We'd built a reputation as the quality option. Not the cheapest, not the biggest, but the one you called when you wanted the job done right. I ran into Colin at a restaurant. Completely random encounter. Brooke and I were there for dinner, and he was there with what I assumed was his wife and some other couple. We made eye contact across the room. He looked away quickly, but then seemed to change his mind and came over to the table. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Hey, heard your company's doing really well." "It's going good. How are you?" "Good. Working with my wife's family now. Restaurant management. Different industry, but interesting. That's good." Silence. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say something, but not sure how. "Look, I know things got bad with Morrison. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about how everything went down." The apology surprised me. Not because it changed anything, but because Colin wasn't usually the type to admit fault. "I appreciate that," I said. "For what it's worth, you were right. I wasn't ready to run that company. I didn't understand what I didn't know until it was too late. Takes guts to admit that. Yeah, well, it's easier now that the consequences are over. Anyway, I won't interrupt your dinner, just wanted to say that." He walked back to his table. Brooke looked at me questioningly. "He apologized," I said. "Did you accept?" I acknowledged it. "That's different. Fair enough." The thing was, I didn't hold anger toward Colin anymore. He'd been put in a position he wasn't qualified for by parents who refused to see his limitations. That wasn't entirely his fault. He should have had the self-awareness to recognize it and refuse the responsibility. But 29-year-olds who've been told they're special, their whole lives rarely have that kind of insight. The anger I'd felt had transformed into something else over the past few years. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. They'd made their choices, I'd made mine, and we were all living with the results. Colin was working in restaurants. Dad's business had collapsed, and I was running a successful company I'd built myself. That was just how things were. Last month, Dad called. First time we'd spoken in close to 3 years. "I wanted to let you know I'm proud of what you've built," he said. "No preamble, just straight to the point. Thanks. I made a mistake. With the succession plan. With how I treated you. I see that now." "Yeah, you did. Can we get together sometime? Talk?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep the clean break that had worked out so well. But another part recognized that life's too short to hold grudges forever. "Maybe," I said. "I'll think about it." That's fair. We haven't gotten together yet. Maybe we will eventually. Maybe the relationship can be salvaged into something different than it was. But if it can't, I'm okay with that too. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.